Hello, everyone. I love the story of Esther. I hope you're enjoying it too. As we continue it today, never forget the entire book is about God's plan to protect the Jews. He does that by using the faith and trust of real people who live and serve Him alone. Let's see what happens to those people today in our story. Last week, satanic Haman had a plan to hang Mordecai and then happily attend the banquet Esther had invited him to. But God had other plans. He kept King Xerxes from being able to sleep one night, so the king would learn it was Mordecai who saved him from an assassination plot. Later, the king was led to honor Mordecai. Interestingly, the king asked Haman how to go about that. Haman was sure the king planned to honor him and suggested the honoree be given one of the king's robes and crowns. The king then suggested Haman gather those and honor Mordecai with them. Wow, what a shock that must have been. But Haman did as he was told to do and led Mordecai through the streets on horseback, announcing the honor. Haman then went home filled with grief and told his wife and friends what happened. Soon, the king's servants arrived to escort Haman to Esther's banquet. As the banquet began, the king insisted Esther make her requests known to him, telling her he will honor whatever she requests. Esther boldly responds, quote, "Grant me my life and spare my people. I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation," end quote. The king asks, "Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther answers, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." King Xerxes arose in anger and left for his garden. Haman, realizing his fate, begs Queen Esther to spare his life. She, of course, did not do that. The king returns, and Haman's face is covered. One of the king's servants speaks up, saying, "A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He made it for Mordecai," end quote. The king then says, "Hang Haman on it." So they did. Let's think about it now. God allowed Haman to build a gallows, but Haman had no idea he was actually building it for himself. His death would not have happened if Esther hadn't had the courage to bring truth to the king. To get that courage, what did she do? She fasted and asked others to do the same. The thing I want us to remember is that God had a plan, but He uses us to complete those plans that He has. To do that, we have to trust Him and move forward with courage, as Esther eventually did. I honestly believe most Christians don't realize that. We've been told God doesn't need us. Really? If that were true, Why did Jesus choose 12 earthly men to walk with him as he began his ministry? He did that because he knew he would soon leave the earth, and his truth had to continue via earthly men. God doesn't need us individually, but he absolutely does use us if we do what we are called to do. If we refuse to answer that call, he doesn't need us because he knows there is someone out there who will say yes. God's a spirit. He isn't walking the earth. He sent the Holy Spirit to live inside each of us, to nudge us to service. Romans chapter 10, verse 14 says, and it's one of my favorite verses, quote, "How can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can they preach unless they are sent? It is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." End quote. Guess what? Those feet belong to you and me. The notion that God doesn't need us seems to be thoroughly disputed in the story of Esther. Well, it is true that if Esther had decided not to intervene, God still would have been successful because he would have chosen someone else to save the Jews. It is also true that God needed someone to intervene on earth. What has God asked you to do? How many times have you ignored the call, so God chose someone else? Have you ever even thought about that? Is there a little nudge inside of you that you have ignored as not really important? Might that nudge have been the Holy Spirit trying to move you to do something for him? I can tell you from experience that once we finally realize God is calling us into his service and we respond, as young Samuel did in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 10, saying, quote, "Speak, for your servant is listening," end quote. God will continue to use us, and we'll easily recognize his calling from then on. Now, back to the story. What was the result of Esther's courage and Haman's hanging? First, the king gave Esther Haman's estate and brought Mordecai into his presence, giving to Mordecai the ring he had once given to Haman. Esther then appointed Mordecai to be the overseer of Haman's estate. Well, as wonderful as all that was, one important thing was overlooked: the preservation of the rest of the Jews. Esther then pleaded with the king to put an end to Haman's evil plan. She requested that an order be written overruling the one Haman had proclaimed. Verse 9 of chapter 8 says, quote, "At once the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote all of Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the heads of all 127 provinces. These orders were sealed by the king and sent out by couriers. The orders, quote, granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them, and to plunder the property of their enemies," end quote. This became law in every province. The city of Susa, home of Mordecai and Esther, held a celebration. Verse 16 says, quote, "It was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and every city, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. Many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them," end quote. From annihilation to victory. Folks, we are in many ways reliving the story of Esther today. Israel was attacked 1 year ago, but many Americans are supporting those who did the attacking. God won't tolerate that. Haman was hung for wanting to annihilate God's chosen people. That should be a lesson to all of us. Stand firmly with Israel at all times, no matter what. Never, never forget that. See you Thursday.